Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, 4 Signs Your District is Ready for an Early Warning System, an example from Guam. I'm Susan Lopez. I'm part of the REL Pacific team, and we're so pleased that you can join us this afternoon in Denver and wherever it is where you are. We've got participants today from across time zones and date lines, so we have a great representation of how an early warning system can help your state or jurisdiction or district help improve dropout rates and keep kids in school. We have an hour together today to cover lots of information and leave time for discussion, so let's get started. REL Pacific and REL Northwest sponsor this webinar, and REL Pacific and Northwest are part of a regional network of laboratory systems, or RELs, which work in partnership with school districts, state departments of education, and others, including jurisdictions, to use data and research to improve academic outcomes for students. Fundamentally, the mission of the RELs is to provide support for a more evidence-reliant education system. REL research alliances are a type of research practice partnership that RELs engage with to bring key stakeholders together to work collaboratively and address problems and issues of high priority and relevance to educators. For example, there are research alliances around early warning systems, college and career readiness, English language learners, and all kinds of topics that are specific to regional needs across the country. Our presenters today are, we have 3 presenters. Our first presenter is Dr. David Stuit, who's based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and is a managing partner at Basis Policy Research. David has many publications and a lot of research to his as credentials, but one of the most relevant for today's conversation, he's a recent author of a REL Midwest report entitled Identifying Early Warning Indicators in 3 Ohio School Districts. So welcome, David, today. Our second presenter is Dr. Natividad, who's the administrator of the Research Planning and Evaluation Division at the Guam Department of Education. And Dr. Zeni is with us today to describe where Guam is in the process of developing and implementing an early warning system and looking together with us at some of the readiness signs that we're going to talk about and how they apply to Guam and what additional information and resources and questions Guam might have that might be helpful to the rest of us as well. And our third speaker is everybody. Hi, Dr. Zeni. And then our third speaker is Sarah Frazelle. Sarah is a senior advisor of research and evaluation at REL Northwest. She is the author of A Practitioner's Guide to Implement Early Warning Systems and has done several webinars and publications on the topic of early warning systems and has worked across the country with states and districts on developing early warning systems and has some great examples and resources to share with us today as well. Our goals for this webinar are to really help to look at and learn about early warning systems and some of the readiness signs that we'll talk about in a few minutes and what questions to ask if you're thinking about implementing or getting ready to implement an early warning system, what some of those next steps might be and discussion questions that you might have, and to help you be more familiar with the resources in the REL's Early Warning Systems Learning Series, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and how to access those resources to support your implementation of an early warning system. And of course, as I mentioned, to talk about Guam and use Dr. Zeni and Guam as a great example of how this information can be really helpful to you. So our first speaker is Dr. David Stuit, and David, I'll pass it off to you to talk about the 4 readiness signs for an early warning system.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining us. I just Googled the time zone in Guam and realized it's 7:30 in the morning there. So really appreciate those of you from Guam who came early to be here.
You're welcome.
Makes my sacrifices of coming at 5:30 in the afternoon not so something to complain about. So thank you. So to start, I want to say the purpose of this discussion, guys, is really to see if you're ready to embark on an effort to implement an early warning system. And so I wanted to begin by thinking about, well, what do we mean by readiness? Readiness doesn't mean that You can go in tomorrow and flip the switch, and the early warning system can be up and running. Obviously not. But what it means is you're set up for a successful implementation. You've got the systems in place that puts you in a good position to be able to implement an early warning system. Although, as Sarah mentioned this yesterday on a call, the actual implementation process can take multiple years. The districts where I've been a part of implementations, it's usually been at least 3 years. You have a year for planning, a year for piloting, and then a year for full implementation where you're trying to work the bugs out. So that's kind of what we mean by ready. I'm going to talk through these 4 signs, and then we'll get the example from Guam as to how ready they are in regards to these. So let's start with the sign number 1. This is having a clear vision for how you want to address the dropout problem, or conversely, how you want to improve graduation rate. Vision, is a term that gets thrown around a lot in the education literature, particularly in the education leadership literature, and it's often abstract. But in this case, we mean something very specific about vision. For one, part of having a vision is your district understands the nature of its dropout problem. It understands how prevalent dropout rates are within your systems and graduation rates. Are they trending up or down? Are they more prevalent for certain subgroups of students? Have you thought about the root causes? It's hard to plan for a successful intervention without a full, good understanding of what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Another component of vision is having a clear set of goals for what it is exactly you want to improve with the problem. And these goals can often take the form of SMART goals, with a specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and then time bound. The agreed upon part, making sure that the vision and the goals are shared amongst practitioners, administrators, and parents and students is important. Then the third component of the vision is just having articulated a clear strategy. So what's going to exactly change within the district or the state or the territory? What practices are going to change? What systems are going to be put in place in order to actually achieve the goals? Sometimes logic modeling is used to lay that out. That could be useful tools in order to show, how the resources and activities that are going to be done are going to impact the goal. So clear vision is important. The second one is a high-quality data system. Early warning systems are data-driven interventions to a degree, in the sense that they require, in this case, student-level data, and it must be collected systematically. The data must be able to be connected to each other by having unique IDs, and then it needs to be analyzed in order to identify the students who are at risk. And all that has to happen for these to be effective relatively quickly. If you want to take 9th grade first semester data or first quarter data and be able to pull that all together in time to flag the students who are at risk and deliver interventions, by the second quarter or the second semester, it has to happen quickly. It can't be something where there's a lot of manual labor involved with that. So that's the key component of that. As part of that, it's just you need to have a system for verifying the integrity of the data that you're collecting and making sure that the data elements you're considering using in your early warning system are accurate for all students and that they're complete in the sense that most students have those records. Because you don't want to, if students aren't showing up in the data set, then they don't have the opportunity to be flagged and, as at risk and receive additional support. So all those things are critical. Sign number 3 goes along with sort of the high quality data system. You need to also have somebody with some expertise in data analytics, or more specifically, statistical analysis of longitudinal data to help support some of the decisions you have to make along the way. One key decision you have to make is what are the actual indicators or the criteria, the data elements that we're going to use to decide if a student is at risk of dropping out. Those indicators, the research often points to the ABCs: attendance, behavior, and coursework. You start with sort of a set of research-motivated indicators, but if you have the capacity to be able to look at your longitudinal data, you can actually identify for your system, your students, the particular indicators that are most predictive of dropout for your particular student population. And that's important because you want to make sure that the kids who are flagged as at risk are actually at risk, and that you don't miss students who should be designated as at risk but are not. And so there are a series of statistical tests that are conducted to kind of assess the accuracy of your indicators. So that's important to have access to them. Now, that access could be, a lot of systems will have a research and evaluation department where there's someone internal who's able to do this type of analysis. Or it could be, utilizing the RELs and asking for some support on this from them. Or there's also, private vendors who have software for early warning systems that will do it within their system. So there's lots of ways to get access if you don't have it internal. And last but not least, an early warning system is only valuable as the interventions it has in place to support the students who are identified by the early warning indicators as at risk. And so districts need to think carefully before they embark on this. Do they have the infrastructure to support the communications logistics? They have to report out often to parents, to students, to teachers, administrators, who's at risk, what supports do they need, and follow up and make sure that they're receiving those supports and evaluate if the supports are effective. That has to be in place in order to implement an early warning system effectively. Communications, we know, is so critical. Communications just across the board in terms of how teachers communicate students at risk status to parents and to students, and how do you communicate to teachers what support students need and make sure that they're getting them. So all those things are important. The last thing I'll say is resources. Resources to support additional interventions. If you identify a large segment of your student population who's at risk, and the early warning indicators identify certain risk factors or academic factors that should be addressed, you need to have the ability to be able to provide resources to support them. So those are the 4 signs. I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion, and it looks like I'm 2 minutes ahead of schedule. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Zenny. Whenever you're ready, Dr. Zenny.
Hi everyone, it's Susan again. It looks like Dr. Zenny got disconnected. So while we work on getting her connected again, I'm going to skip over her presentation for now and ask Sarah to talk to us a little bit about the resources available through education or through REL Northwest and the REL Learning Series on early warning systems, and hope that we can get Dr. Zenny back in just a few minutes. So Sarah, if you can take it away, and we'll advance over to those slides for you.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Sarah Frazelle, and I've been working with early warning system implementation for the past 4.5 years. My background was actually economics and statistics, and I kind of came to this realization at some point that no matter how great the numbers we put out there are and how wonderful I think the reports are, they're not really going to be very helpful if we can't teach people how to actually use the data that we're presenting to them. So a couple of years ago, we started this project to start looking at nationally what is available out there on early warning system implementation, from districts to schools to community-based organizations such as Big Brothers, Big Sisters. What are people doing out there to implement early warning systems? And from that, we wrote this guide that was published last year and developed 5 main areas of implementation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of briefly go over some of these big bucket areas of implementation to help you start thinking about, like, are we ready to implement this? How is this going to work in our district? So the first thing that I usually tell districts and schools is that we really want to combine our early warning system with other initiatives that we have going on. We don't want to create another thing to do. We all know that there's a lot of different initiatives out there, and we tend to go for whatever's next, whatever's the shiniest thing that's coming up on the horizon. But if some of the power of early warning systems can really be about leveraging the initiatives that you have. So if you have a response intervention team or a PBIS team or a multi-tiered system of support, all of these initiatives can be blended with an early warning system where the early warning system data is actually like your screener, so it's helping identify those kids. So that's the first thing that I usually tell districts when we're working on the implementation process. But the first part of the guide actually talks about how to build that early warning system team. So looking around at your school or your district or your state department even, who do you have that's kind of already meeting together, looking at data to try to help predict student supports that the students would need? And so as you're building this team, you really want to think about including people who have the authority to make decisions. So it's no good if we just have one little group that's working on it, but they don't actually have the power to implement the things that they are seeing are needed in the school. You want people who have diverse knowledge of the student body, of all of those different types of students that you have in your school. You want someone who's knowledgeable of a range of available interventions. So that's another thing that we see is that whoever's providing the interventions, it depends on, is that curriculum or is that special education? And a lot of times there's not a lot of communication between the two departments. So we really want somebody who can be well-versed in knowing where all the interventions are that we have available for our students. We also want somebody who is able to have some expertise in managing and analyzing data so that the team meetings, when you do meet, are very effective. Somebody's already pulled up the students that we're going to look at and kind of walk through the data so that we can really dig down into the root causes of why students are struggling and then assign them the appropriate intervention. We also want representation from the district if you're at a school level, and if you're at the district level, you also want some representation from your school so that everybody's on the same page. I think the biggest thing about early warning systems is they can work if we have that level of collaboration between everyone. So after you kind of pull all this group together, you're going to be able to determine each team member's role and responsibility. And then be able to start thinking about what makes sense for us to be able to have a meeting schedule that's routine. We want to create those communication processes within the early warning system team to be able to garner feedback from all the other staff members that we have, because we really do want this to be a school-wide effort. We want it to be a systematic thing that we're putting in place across the schools. We want it to be the team to also be able to disseminate the information to the parents and the community and the family. I think that's another piece that we really talk about, occasionally including your community members in the early warning system teams. We've seen a lot of, I've worked with reservation districts in Montana, and we've seen a lot of movement and action actually when we've gone out and worked with the tribes and really included their voice in the early warning system and how we help those kids. So thinking about that as you're kind of building your team. The other people that you might consider in your team would be, district representation, and then, so district representation, school representation, community representation, and also sometimes the student voice. And I'll talk just a little bit more about that in a minute. So that's kind of the first part is we define who that early warning system team is. And then the second and third parts are making sure that we have valid indicators and that we have the appropriate types of reports. Like David was saying, the most common types of indicators are attendance, course performance, especially the number of Fs, grade point average, and also disciplinary incidents. So we know nationally, we see this repeatedly, that these indicators are valid for predicting whether a student is going to stay in school and graduate or whether they're going to drop out. So as you can kind of consider what kind of influences a student's decision to drop out, you need to think about these indicators as more of a symptom rather than a cause. So if a student isn't attending regularly, then it's not necessarily that we just want to target that for the sake of targeting it. We want to make sure that that student's there to be able to get the information. A lot of times, though, that's just a symptom of kind of what's going on deep underneath in that student's life. And so engaging that student in the conversation, what else is going on? You know, if the student misses 5 days in a row, then there's probably other things that are going on in that student's life that possibly we might be able to help out with. The other thing I wanted to just mention about indicators is that we don't want to use different subgroups as indicators. For example, we know that students with special education status have a lower probability of graduating, but that doesn't make special education status an indicator. That's just a lens that we can look at to make sure that we're serving all of our students equitably and making sure that we're providing the appropriate supports for everyone as well. So I really encourage districts not to think of class or racial background, English language learner status, or special education status as indicators. Those are not indicators. Those are more lenses that we can make sure that we're providing appropriate supports for all of our students and to help develop culturally responsive interventions when necessary. So those are the kind of the big bucket things about the indicators. When you're thinking about the reports, there's also 2 levels of reporting. So you want to be able to look at the school level just to get a general pulse. You know, maybe we're going to look at special education students as a lens. How many of those students are off track, and what can we do to help them? What about our 9th graders? Do we have more 9th graders off track in attendance compared to behavior? And if so, what are some targeted interventions that we can give to the 9th grade class since we see that they're having an issue as a group? So we want to be able to look at those big school level reports, but then we also want to be able to dig down a little bit deeper into the student and the individual level. And so that way we can identify a few students to talk about at each meeting. And what the data can do and what an early warning system can do is really use that data to be proactive and about helping that student. There's different ways. A lot of times when I go into smaller districts, they're like, you know, we don't need an early warning system. We already know the kids who are off track. And generally that's true. We will have kids who are flagged red, who are very, very off track. And those are the students usually that everybody's known about since kindergarten or 1st grade. And you go back and talk to their principals, oh yeah, I would have known that kid would have dropped out. But where the power of an early warning system really is the kids who are just starting to fall off track. Because those are the kids that usually, maybe they missed 5 days of school in a row, but they were a good kid. They're not causing any behavior problems. And those shy kids, the well-behaved kids, are typically the ones that when I go into a small district, they're like, oh, I did not think of her or him. And then we can start to have those conversations. And as we have those conversations, they start to think, oh, well, you know, they did just go through a serious life crisis with their family, or this happened in their life. And then we can start to really target how can we support that student and that family as they're going through this time. So those are the different types of reports and indicators. The next bucket of implementation from the guide is really looking at mapping interventions to the indicators. And so there's like 5 easy steps when you're starting to create this map of interventions. The first is that we need to be able to define an intervention. Do we consider people an intervention, like a counselor or a psychologist or a school nurse? Or are we considering initiatives as interventions? I had one school that I was talking to, and they considered a clothes closet an intervention because as they were talking to their kids, they realized that some of them weren't coming to school because they didn't have clean clothes. So they started this clothes closet, and the kids could come in early in the morning and pick out clean clothes, and they found that it did help the attendance for that group of kids. So just making sure as your team, as you are a team, to define what an intervention is, and then begin to identify where are these interventions. And not only just thinking about what do we have available in our school, but also what do we have available in the community. That's another area that is a huge resource a lot of times. We have community partners or people that want to help out, but a lot of times they don't know exactly where they need to help out or where the school needs the most help. So being able to look at this data and say, okay, look, we flagged 40% of our kids with behavior incidents or attendance. We really need some help in providing support for these kids who are struggling with attendance or whichever indicator is being flagged the most. So after you identify all those different interventions, making sure to link them back to what indicator you're trying to target. So if you have like a check and connect or something like that where the student comes in and checks in with a teacher every morning, that might be most geared towards helping improve attendance. But going through each one of the interventions that you have and really deciding, okay, what are we trying to improve with this intervention? And along with that, also identifying what tier. So I said at the very beginning just a little bit about RTI or PBIS or multi-tiered systems of support. All of these have these intervention tiers where we have school-wide interventions, small group interventions, and then targeted interventions that are more individualized. So being able to really identify what tier the intervention is on can help you continue to create this mapping of what you have available. And then you can start to look at, after you have this systematic mapping of all of the interventions that you have and what they're supposed to be targeting, we can then look at the early warning system reports and see how many kids are flagged with the different indicators. So if I'm a school and I look at my report, I see that I've flagged 60% of my students with attendance, and I look over at my intervention mapping worksheet and I see that I've only got interventions to support 40% of the kids, then that means I've got a gap there that I need to help support these students with. And that's really when you can go into the community and ask for more supports in those areas. The other thing to do, what I mentioned earlier, involving the different local and different tribes or the different community groups that are out there. Different ethnicities might have different reasons why they aren't able to attend school. So really being able to get out into the community and engage those people in that conversation is really important. And then finally, not forgetting to include the student voice to help really develop those culturally responsive interventions. And the last part of the guide is thinking about evaluation and making sure that we're keeping track of each one of those students so that when we put them in an intervention, that we can look later on in a semester perhaps and say, okay, this kid is improving or they're not. And if they're not, we need to figure out something else. And so those are the 5 main areas of implementation that this guide goes over, and this is it's the link to that guide is right there if you want to click on that. And then just a couple of words real quick about this is part of an early warning system series. It's a learning series supported by IES, and so this recording will be available on the IES website along with two of the other ones I think that you might find interesting are EWS 101, which just goes over the basics of how to implement that and an early warning system, and EWS 201, which goes a little bit deeper into that intervention mapping that I was kind of talking about. And both of those webinars actually focus on or have practitioners presenting about their stories and how they've implemented this and the challenges that they came up against and how they kind of worked through those. So I encourage you to use this website to look at the other resources that are available. Just real quick, a couple webinars that are coming up, I believe before the end of the month, and all of these will take place. This one is sponsored by REL Northeast and Islands. One question that I get a lot is how to convince teachers and administrators to use data in a proactive way. And this can be a hard task because for over a decade we've been using data for accountability. And we really have to start flipping that mentality of data use as punishment to data use as a tool to help us help the kids. And so this webinar is probably a good resource to start thinking about that. We also have a webinar coming up from REL Appalachia that's going to be talking about focusing on how early warning systems may differ depending on your context. So if you're a state agency versus a school or a district, just talking about those different types of systems and how that might look different. And then finally we have a webinar from REL West that's going to be highlighting one district's journey over how they implemented over the past few years and how that's been an iterative process between the district and the school and with their research practitioner partners through the REL. So those are what is upcoming, and so I encourage you to, if you're new to this, there's lots of resources out there funded by IES this year, and I encourage you to check them out. And if you have any other additional questions, I'm always free to chat with you via email. And so with that, I'm hoping Dr. Zany is back on. Susan?
I am.
Hi, Diane.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn this over to you now.
Uh-huh. Thank you very much. That was very informative, Sarah. Thank you. I will check out those resources. As a matter of fact, I actually looked over that publication of the IES, but listening to your presentation really opened up a lot of other things that we probably have not thought about. So, but before I go ahead with my presentation, I'd like to share the things that I follow when I deal with data. I call them my 3 laws of data collection and use. So I would like to start with the 0th law of data collection and use, is that ensure the quality of data. Before any sorts of early warning system or any use of data or any reporting or any of that sort, make sure that you question the quality of the data, that there's a check for the quality of data in the student information system. And I have some kind of guideline what quality means to me. They are my acronym DATA. D for determinative, that it is valid. The data in the information system is valid and determined. You have a use for it. It is dependable. You can rely upon it. That's for D. A is for the data should be accurate, correct, the right one that you actually need for the reporting or the use of data that you are intending it for. T is for timely. It is up to date. It's not stale data. It's not data from last year. Although you can use, for longitudinal purposes, you can use that. But for it has to be, data has to be able to meet what you need for the question of the day. And A is you collect all the data that you need, not all you want. You know how we have a tendency for, oh, let's put that in the information system. Oh, that's nice to put in the information system, or without really thinking about how we're going to use that piece of information. So your student information system becomes so clogged up that sometimes it can get very confusing what data you actually have in there. So how do you ensure that your data is of quality? Of course, we can mention the data quality campaign is a good model, although we were not aware of it at that time, but we were determined to ensure that specific data in our student information system are of good quality. Then also there's the NCS forum that has at least 4 publications and a curriculum and training program to help staff learn to develop a culture of data quality. I think the title for that publication is The Forum Curriculum for Improving Education Data. I actually used this when I started my data quality campaign with our computer operators, with school staff that are in charge of entering data on a day-to-day basis in our student information system. Now to the DATA acronym, I want to add C. Data has to be comparable. We don't normally see this as a quality data characteristic, but for me, the data that we collect has to be comparable. You have to aim for the standard. You have to aim for what is the standard definition of the particular data. When you say dropout rate, is that comparable with the rest of the nation? Are you using some standard definition, standard method for collection, for calculation? And it was mentioned earlier, for communicating or visualizing that particular variable. Of course, a resource for this is the CEDS, the Common Education Data Standards produced by the NCES. Relative to data use, we do not collect anything you do not need. How do you begin to know what you need and conduct the analysis of mandated and required reports? Data does not always need to be something that is requested or required or mandated. There was mentioned earlier that we have to move away from compliance to actually using data to help us help the kids. So in Guam, we are already thinking about not merely complying to federal reports or legal mandates that require us to come up with annual reports, but to actually use the data to help the kids succeed. So, and finally, my law of data collection is it takes a whole island. Do not work alone. There was mentioned earlier that you must organize a team or several teams. You must have a working group. For Guam, we organized a district data team to discuss what are the data needs of the department. Apart from compliance, what is it that we need in order for us to meet the data needs of our state strategic plan? So I've just completed what we call the data framework for the state strategic plan. We also want to make sure that whatever we are able to collect for we've implemented the Common Core state standards and adopted the comprehensive student assessment system, shifting from norm reference to criterion reference testing. So all of that are generating data that we can use to help students succeed. So given all of that, addressing the quality of the data in the student information system, for me, is the very first step before you even begin to think about an early warning system. Because whatever we put in our student information system, those are the data that are used or are fed into what we call the at-risk calculator. And I will be talking more about that later on. So the Guam Education Board adopted the state strategic plan in September 2014, and specifically goals 1 and 2 address student success at every grade level, not only in academic areas, but also in developing positive behavior. And our vision for our student is that every student is responsible, respectful, and ready for life. That readiness for life is actually tied to our college and career readiness vision for all our graduates. So specifically, goal 2 addresses the fact that we want our students to move from grade level to grade level successfully. We do not want to wait for our students to be at 12th grade or 11th grade and find out that, hey, they need help. No, our state strategic plan is such that we want to be able to identify what those factors are that will hinder a student from progressing from grade level to grade level successfully. So that's how we design our data framework for the state strategic plan. So for reducing our dropout rate, it specifically states goal number 2 states that all students will successfully progress from grade to grade and from one level of schooling to another in order to maximize the opportunities to successfully graduate from high school. Relative to this goal, we adopted the ACT Aspire. It is a criterion reference testing. It is a district-wide summative test that enables us to track the students' progress from grade 3 to grade 10, in which a student at grade 10, which has a score equivalent to ready level, means that this student has a 50% or more chance of successfully entering college at grade, even as early as grade 11. So from 3rd grade, we are able to keep track of the students' trajectory for success or a chance for failure or dropout when we see that the performance level of the child is not up to par. And there are benchmarks for every grade level and every subject tested in the ACT Aspire. We are in our 2nd year of the ACT Aspire implementation, And we are certainly using the data for keeping track of how our students are progressing successfully relative to goal number 2. Our dropout rate last year was 4.7%. How we compute our dropout rate is we're following the NCES formula that was adopted some time ago, almost 14 years ago, and the rate was 4.7. We aim to drop this to about 3.5%, and eventually at the end of our state strategic plan, which is in school year 2019 and 2020, will be about 1.5%. Now, in light of ESSA, we are going to switch the computation of our dropout rate to the ACGR, the adjusted cohort graduation rate, and this will be the first year that we will be reporting using the AGCR. Now, the strategies to address the dropout and graduation rates are articulated in our state strategic plan. How we formulated it is, for every goal, we have particular objectives in our state strategic plan, and underneath the objectives are a number of strategies that we will use to address the graduation rate as well as the dropout rate. Now, in order to help us with our beginning early warning system, we actually use or contracted Tyler Pulse person. It is a longitudinal data system that feeds off Power School, which is our student information system. Since last year, we began working with Pearson on establishing the at-risk indicator, and some of our principals actually using this system on some kind of a pilot basis. But one of the things that we are currently working on is customizing the weights that are assigned to the factors that come into computation or come to play in computing the at-risk indicator. There are about 23 data elements that are already resident in our Power School system that are part of the at-risk formula. And if I may mention some of them, for example, we have the absent percent. This category is based on the percentage of absenteeism for the student. Then we also have missing marks. Depending on this category is either the percentage of absenteeism that is unexcused or the total number of absence marks on file for the student where there is no contact from the parent about why the student was absent. Then we also have attendance consecutive. We monitor the number of days the student has been consecutively absent on the date of the calculation. Then we also monitor tardies. The category is based on the total number of tardies on file for each student. And then we have total number of discipline events on file for the current year for each student. The total number of events on file for a student will be multiplied by the weight. And that weight, we're currently customizing that weight as we speak. Then we have discipline action days. This category is based on the total number of days that a student has been suspended. Then we have discipline event type, total number of events, discipline events that match the user entered discipline types. We have also, of course, the grades GPA, how students' GPA compares to that of their peers, grades GPA improvement. We also include Fs for the current year, failure marks. The Fs a student has been awarded in the current school year. Then we have transcript Fs, 9 grade Fs, credits, and a number of variables that relate with the test scores of the student in the ACT Aspire, as well as in the standards-based assessment. So using these variables, we come up with an at-risk indicator for every student in the school, and associated risk value computed based on these 3 variables. Every day, a principal can look on Tyler Pulse and see that the students are ranked from highest to lowest risk, and even the school valedictorian will have a risk factor of maybe perhaps 0.01, and students with the highest risk factor is on the top of the list. So we look at students that are on the top 50 in the list, and address the needs of that student. The Tyler Pulse enables us to click on the student name and determine what is making the risk indicator very high for this particular student. So whether it will be the attendance, whether it is because of the academic scores, whether it's the discipline issue, it is easy for the school principal and the school staff to be able to know what type of intervention would be needed for this particular student or for this group of students. As to the question, readiness and access to expertise in data analytics, I have some formal training in data collection, data analysis, and I also am the representative to the NCES forum, which enables me to be exposed to the best practices in data collection, data analysis, and data reporting, and which I bring back to Guam and train my people on whatever it is that I learned from the NCES. Also chair the district data team that oversee and build capacity to sustain the EWS. We have not organized the formal early warning system team that will manage the system. The district data team focuses on the data and the quality of the data in the student information system that will be used in the at-risk calculator. But the type of team that was mentioned by Sarah earlier, that is something that we still need to organize. Then currently, for us to be able to further analyze the data, of course we use SPSS, but we recently acquired Tableau software to conduct simple data analytics, and also for me, for other staff other than myself who have no statistics background, to be able to visualize data meaningfully and effectively. Relative to the strategies that match the student's risk factor, yes, our state strategic plan has specific strategies, and they are enunciated in goal number 2, strategy 1. And they read as follows: we identify new or improve current intervention programs for struggling students. We also develop a program that explicitly addresses the academic needs of migrant learners or newcomers to the system. And we will provide teachers ongoing training and support in teaching students with special needs and English language learners. For about 3 years now, Guam has been very actively implementing what we call the PLC, and for a really long time our teachers were not talking to each other. They were little silos in their own little classroom, and whatever problems they have in the classroom, they have only themselves to address it. But when we implemented what we call the PLC, teachers are talking to each other, they are sharing data, and data from the at-risk indicator is one of the most important data that they talk about when they meet in their PLC. So what do we need in order for us to move forward with our early warning system? I've heard much from both David and Sarah. Thank you very much for your presentation. They're very enlightening. They will provide us better guidance in moving forward. Well, the current work is on establishing or customizing the weights for our at-risk calculator. Perhaps I can get some guidance on that as well, apart from working with our contractor. Then we want to also be able to develop a simple early warning system dashboard. And finally, of course, we want to learn further from the experience of other districts And I know the resources that Sarah shared are good for addressing more strategies in addressing at-risk student needs. So I guess that's all I have to share about where Guam really is at. Just to be sure, we have not really formally implemented our early warning system, but some of our principals are already tinkering with the at-risk calculator using the default weights from the, from Tyler Pulse. Once we establish the customized weights, then we will feel a lot better with our at-risk calculator in the Tyler Pulse system. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share Guam's efforts in establishing the early warning system. If there's any questions, I'm available. Salamat po. Si Juus Maasi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zeni. What a great presentation and a great way to help us understand better what it really means to implement an early warning system and all the pieces that need to get in place. As David said at the beginning of the presentation, this could be a 3-year process, so it's not something that could be quickly done or that there's not all kinds of nuances and things to think about. I put up a survey real quick just before we do questions and answers. If any of our participants would do us the favor of filling out this survey before you leave the call today, it's very helpful to us to improve the webinars that we do in the future. Do any of our participants have any questions for Dr. Zeni or any of our presenters today? Just feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions. And while we're waiting for that, maybe we could take one of Dr. Zeni's questions and pose it to our presenters and see what kind of answers we might be able to help her with. The first question she had was about localizing weights to calculate at-risk indicators, and it sounds like customizing indicators for the Guam population as opposed to many of the indicators that exist are for mainland-based student data. Sarah or David, do you have any responses to that question?
Sarah?
I'm sorry, could you summarize the question real quick again?
The question is mostly about localizing weights and all weights used to calculate the at-risk indicators. Currently in Guam, most of the indicators the default weights are based on mainland-based student data. And Dr. Zeni can clarify as well.
Right. I mean, I would suggest definitely validating them locally with your own data is important. I know that we've validated some indicators for different populations, and sometimes the national thresholds are not predictive at all for different groups of students. In general, we all know that attendance, behavior, and course grades on some level are always predictive, pretty much. We haven't found any cases of that not being true, but it's more of where do you flag the students at, what is that threshold. It sounds like if she's got one number, like a predictive probability, that where to set that threshold might be different for different locations as well. And so I know in Montana they're using a predictive probability, and they went through quite a few. And I mean, the big thing is that you want to identify as many students as possible who actually did drop out, but at the same time, try not to identify too many people who were flagged but then ended up graduating. So it's this kind of balance of like how many just where to put that line. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
I can chime in here too. I mean, I think one of the two other things to consider, the study that we did recently released through REL Midwest looked at that question about how can you improve the accuracy of your indicators by doing the customization, and we found that you could, and that the cut points do vary. In this case, we were looking at an urban district in Ohio, a suburban, a more rural one, and the cut points varied significantly. So I think it is important, but one thing to consider is, what do you mean by accurate? So Sarah mentioned this issue of you want to maximize, what we think of as your true positives, right? You correctly identify the students who are at risk, and minimize your false alarms, where you're, identifying students who really, aren't at risk and they're trying And in that case, you end up providing services to students who don't need it. And so you'll see some, it's very important to make sure that you look at those types of accuracy indicators in order to make sure your system's efficient and that the right students get served. Because it's very easy. You'll sometimes see, news reports come out that say, this early warning system can identify 90% of students who are at risk by first grade. What they really mean is they're going to cast such a wide net, they're going to label almost all first graders at risk, and among those, that captures 90% of the students who are truly at risk, but it also in the process maybe captures 70% of the students who aren't at risk and classifies as at risk. So in which case you end up with so many kids in intervention, it's not very targeted. So all to say is, and how you think about accuracy, it does to some degree depend on what types of resources you have to support them. It's better to make sure you identify, in some cases, the students who are most extremely at risk if your interventions are limited. The last thing I would say is you keep it intuitive where possible, because you could try to, some of these indicators, tinker and say, we're going to go with 88, an attendance rate at 88%, instead of something simple like 90%. And those really may not differ that much. So try to stick with the intuitive indicators. And as Sarah mentioned, the actionable thing is critically important. You want to choose indicators that aren't just background characteristics on the student. The background characteristics are important to look at to make sure that the indicators are accurate for all of those groups. But you don't want to include things like ELL participation or special ed participation or other things that are really background factors because they're not trackable. They're not things that you can really move.
Great, thank you. Hey,
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you. This is a question from Jessica. The participant, these I think are for Dr. Zetti. She wants to know if Guam is at year one at the moment of implementing an early warning system, and also who are the Guam Department of Education members that make up the district data team, and is the district data team the early warning systems team as well? She has one more question. Let you answer those first.
Okay. No, the district data team is not the early warning system team. The way it was described by Sarah earlier, the district data team focuses on the quality of the data and the use of the data. However, within the district data team, we started to talk about the early warning system because the data elements that we are keeping track in our Power School or student information system are the very same variables that go into the calculation of the at-risk variables. So it's almost like there is some connection, but the early warning system team will have a slightly different responsibility once the system is up and about, and that's maintaining the system, making sure that the data are being used the way they're intended, conducting the training for staff and school staff and teachers so that they know how to use the indicators, and then also conducting the evaluation of how effective is the early warning system. So those are things that are not yet in place, and that will be the responsibility of what we will call the early warning system team. As to the composition of the district data team, I actually have the memo here. Of course, I'm the team leader for the district data team. Then we are comprised of a combination of school staff, data staff from school and from the central office, as well as specific administrators that we kind of know are already data users and are toying with the at-risk indicators. So we have the administrator of the student support system. We have the deputy superintendent for education support and community learning. Then we have a high school principal. We have the middle school principal. We have 3 from elementary, and we have an additional from another middle school. Then we have included the deputy superintendent for curriculum and instruction. And then that team has a technical support team, which they would come in the meetings upon invitation when we need to be enlightened about how to get about certain things. Like, for example, if we can include or what we can do to change a few of our data elements in the student information system, and is our system capable of doing certain things that we want it to do. So we call them the technical support team. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Zian. One last question. It seems like every student from 3rd grade has or will have an at-risk score. Who has access to that score? Is it principal, staff, or parents? And we can stay on just a few more minutes and let you answer that question.
For Guam, it's the principal that has, or the designate by the principal. It could be the assistant principal for student services, or no, the parents don't have access to that because of the type of information that are in there. It's the principals that share the information with the teachers. And often our principals who are toying with the at-risk indicator, they actually join the conversations with the teachers. We have about, I would say, about 7 such principals that are now trying to use the indicator. And the feedback that I've been getting from them is that even though we have default weights in the system, the accuracy of the indicator, the score indicators are kind of somewhat reliable. The students that they know should be at risk are in the top 10 of the list, and students that are at moderate risk are kind of accurately put in the ranking. So, but we still want to do the customization of our at-risk calculator because of the demographics that we have. Our demographics is somewhat different from that of the states, and that's something that we want to factor in our computation.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Zeddy. I hope everyone had a chance to take the survey, and we really appreciate your time here today and you joining us for this webinar. The last slide has the emails for all of our presenters, as well as my email as well. This will be available as a recording to you, so if this is information you'd like to share with someone on your team or anyone in your states or jurisdictions, please do that. We also have a corresponding discussion guide that REL Pacific will be releasing probably by the end of the month or early in the next month, and we'll be happy to send you a copy of that as well. That kind of expands on the conversation that David started as the author of the guide, and also provides some more examples and discussion questions that you could use in your own jurisdictions, states, and districts when you're thinking about an early warning system. Thank you to all of our presenters today, to David, Dr. Zeddy, Sarah, for your time. Thank you for coming, and good luck with early warning systems.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.